My name is Gregory and I'm a public health specialist and I work with British Red Cross. I have to apologise on two counts really. One is that Stephen and I prepared our presentations in different continents. So I was in Mongolia, Stephen was in Oxfordshire. So there may be a little bit of overlap, hopefully not too much. And if I look like I'm corpsing, you can see that there's the word "the" twice. That's probably because I was corpsing during the night when I was preparing this. So this is a statement of the problem. But I'm probably asleep rather than corpsing. So I've just got back from Mongolia. So go through the context. So this is the background to a project that British Red Cross set up, and we're working with ARUP and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine around emergency hand washing, specifically emergency hand washing. So the context that we're looking at, international emergencies often result in populations congregating in small areas, very congested environments, where there's no, either the water and sanitation infrastructure has collapsed, or else they've moved to an area where there is no infrastructure. And obviously, there's a risk of disease spread. So you've got examples like the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, Haiti, where cholera broke out, and obviously the infrastructure had been damaged or was actually quite poor in the first place. And in the example of Bangladesh, this is quite interesting, and it probably follows on a little bit from one of our earlier presentations around this choice about protecting groundwater, like doing a lot of work around fecal sludge management. And to what extent is that the greatest risk? Most of what we've done in Bangladesh in the Cox's Bazar camp, the mega camp, is around protecting groundwater. So British Red Cross has done a lot of work, and one of my colleagues, Jo, has just come back from there, so you'd be able to ask her about this. But a lot of work was done around fecal sludge management, and a lot of agencies are doing work there. When you've actually done some water testing, we find that probably around 7% of the groundwater is contaminated. Additionally, you've got contamination at the collection of water, so the well mouth is contaminated. But 52% additional on top of that is contamination that's happening at the transport or in the household. And this is when you start to think about probably two different ways of intervening. One is barrier methods to protect water, like things like the Oxfam bucket, which stops people making hand contact. So that's one way. Another way is hand washing. So we're not saying that hand washing is the be-all and end-all of this, but it's certainly an area that hasn't really played much of a part in emergencies, and we don't really have good solutions for emergency hand washing. And of course, you've got the added problem of higher case fatalities in these areas. You've got poor medical infrastructure, and the health status of people who've travelled a long way, such as in Bangladesh, they're already suffering from malnutrition. So some of the contexts. So this is an African context. You can see that people are arriving. This will be a reception centre, more established, but obviously very, very congested environments. This is actually Cox's Bazar. So this just gives you a little bit of a sort of panorama view. And this is without the rains. When you get the rains, it's horrendous. Really horrendous. It's actually very dangerous to walk. People are moving around. These small streams become torrents. People are slipping down slopes. There's greater risk of contamination, etc. And people are actually carrying barrels of shit between latrines and the treatment sites. So it's, there's obviously issues around hygiene promotion for the people doing the work who are manually removing material from these latrines. So in emergency response, water is always the first consideration. That's completely understandable. Sanitation is often neglected or seen as too difficult. And certainly fecal sludge management is something that probably most agencies are struggling with at the moment. And hygiene really, it's kind of a second cousin. It doesn't really register very much. In long-term programs, it's a bit, as we've seen, that there's a lot of emphasis on it. But quite often that emphasis is on education, not actually providing a real solution for people. in terms of our involvement, British Red Cross deploys a mass sanitation module, which is a team of engineers, hygiene promoters, who go out and try to create solutions to people in terms of their sanitation and hygiene problems. What we don't have in that is we don't really have a rapid response hand washing solution. So that's what it's focusing on, trying to protect groundwater, household drinking water through hygiene and sanitation, and obviously reduce the spread of disease. It doesn't have anything really suitable to deploy. They tend to develop something in the field or use local materials to develop something. Quite often, they're not very durable solutions, and they're not suited to large numbers of people. So what is available? There are lots of things on the market at the moment. They tend to be unattractive. They don't really resemble things that you would understand as a hand washing solution. They have quite often small volume. When I came back from Mongolia, I recalled seeing quite a few people in social centres where you get very poor people who don't have very much in terms of their wash infrastructure. And you'll get 20 or 30 people in one sort of social centre, and there'll be a hand washing solution, hand washing device, and it will be about this big, and it will be empty. And that's in a kind of more development setting. Imagine if you're in Dadaab and you have maybe 100 people using a latrine. How does that factor in terms of hand washing if you have even a 10-litre container? The solutions are often gravity fed, so top heavy and unstable. They're not usually very robust. Everyone probably knows the tippy tap. That's a common solution throughout the world, which is just a jerry can with a rope and a stick. It would be destroyed within probably half a day. Or there's other solutions which are high cost and bulky. They don't stack, so they're not very good for transporting. Quite often they're not customizable. That's it. It does this thing for this particular purpose, and you can't use it for anything else. Quite often, in the case of Haiti, people stole all the taps of tap stands. So if you had hand washing, they were gone. We have to think that the value of something that we might see as disposable or just a single use might be higher to some people who are very poor. An example is, I think there was an example in one of our programs where people had removed a bin that was used for menstrual hygiene disposal. It was just a plastic bin, but somebody valued that. Water's depleted through other uses. There's very practical problems. You set something up for hand washing, but then people are filling up their household drinking water. Totally understandable. How do you stop them from doing that? Obviously, one way is to provide another source for drinking water that's accessible. Unsuitable for children and people with disabilities, and lacking continuous flow, so you have to hold it open while you're using it, for example. So you can't really properly wash your hands. Here are some examples. So there you have a sort of unstable solution, the tippy tap. Some of the issues around it, so stability. Is this really going to be durable? And this one here with the raised tank, how do you get the water there in the first place if you don't have pumps? And those are some examples that are available commercially or through NGOs, other organizations. Just to give you an idea of some of the different solutions. These are all good for certain settings. They might be good for schools, they might be good in development settings. Unfortunately, we haven't really found any of these available currently. You might actually know something that's in development or that we haven't found, but there's been quite a bit of research. But nothing really meets all the criteria. So if you start building on what's already there, one of the tendencies is to then try and troubleshoot problems with the existing hardware. So taking an existing design and say, all right, the tap flow isn't adequate, so let's set up a complex lever system to try and, this has actually happened. So you've got taps where you have to hold them open, and organizations then developing systems to hold them open using a foot pedal. The valves intended for universal use, again, then get sort of trapped in these single-use models where you'd have a particular container design, and it's no longer a universal tap. It's built into an existing design. So then you have the problem of having to move this whole device around rather than just a tap. One way of restricting use of hand-washing water for drinking is to add soap to it. That's one solution that people have found. Another one is to have kind of ad hoc kind of trays or basins, just not to be used as a basin per se, but just to stop people getting a jerry can underneath it. Incorporating signs to instruction on function, where something doesn't look like a hand-washing device, big arrows and illustrations to indicate that it is a hand-washing device. And one thing you find is that in these developments, most of the design emphasis is on the container or the valve tap. And then we end up trying to solve the problem that's been created by the original design. So this work that we've been doing with London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and ARUP, what are our roles? So we described the requirements in relation to the problem, so that what I've just described to you, but actually setting up a whole list. It's actually quite an extensive list that we gave Stephen at the beginning of the different types of what it's supposed to be able to do, and what are the conditions around the use of the hardware. So what would have to endure it in the wild as such. We also added some other conditions around, it's got to be affordable. So we've got to get this onto our emergency response items catalogue. If it can't go on there, if it's not affordable enough, then it's not going to be distributed. It has to be relatively compactable, light, transportable. Then London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine briefed ARUP and us around kind of what makes a good hygiene solution. What's the ideal environment? And also some of those social and cultural drives that make hand washing more likely. ARUP's approach was to think of the intended function, not say, well, here's a hand washing device. How can we develop a hand washing device? It was really about saying, well, what does it have to do, and where does it have to be, and who's going to be using it? So a blank canvas. So it could have been something much more complex, or it could have been as simple as an impregnated cloth. They were thinking about the intended function. And the last point, really, and this is from my experience in public health. If you look at some of the great successes in public health, they're things that have kind of forced people into situations. So almost not giving people a choice. It's making it really, keeping it simple, making it almost a natural process. A convenience. So everyone knows the John Snow story of cholera. The reason we have cholera in London is because everyone washes their hands, right? Well, it's not. Clearly it's not. We've got infrastructure here. We've got chlorination of water. We've got a developed sewage system. If we were relying on people's hand washing behavior, we'd have cholera here. That's the reality. So we don't have the advantages in emergency settings of that infrastructure. Therefore, we have to go back to some of the issues that we've pointed out and say, well, how do we make it easy for people to wash their hands? And part of that is actually having a solution. I remember in Kosovo, people in the capital saying, well, people who come from Skanderai, they're primitive people. They don't even wash their hands. The reality was the people in Skanderai didn't have any water to wash their hands. So the very basic requirement is that you've got to have the materials to do what you want to do, and you've got to make it simple for people to do it. So that would be my mantra. Give me convenience or give me death, really. And that's it. Thank you.